Most people believe support is a moral right. They believe effort should summon allies, that sincerity attracts assistance, that kindness creates safety. This belief is not harmless. It is a structural weakness. In moments where progress actually matters, when stakes rise and resources thin, this belief becomes a liability that delays action and exposes dependence. History does not reward those who wait to be supported. It advances those who learn to operate when no one is coming. If you are still measuring your potential by how much encouragement you receive, you are already behind. The world does not withhold support out of cruelty. It withholds it because uncertainty makes observers cautious. People align with momentum, not intention. Until momentum is undeniable, you are alone. By the end of this journey, that solitude will no longer feel like abandonment. It will feel like leverage. You will stop seeing yourself as prey waiting to be rescued, and start operating as the architect of your own position. Number 1 confronts the threat of emotional dependency on validation. When support is absent, most people internalize doubt. They assume silence is judgment, that lack of encouragement reflects lack of worth. This is a psychological trap rooted in social conditioning. Humans evolved in groups where approval meant survival, so the nervous system interprets isolation as danger. Machiavelli observed this vulnerability when he wrote that men judge more by the eye than by the hand, meaning perception out. When you require external confirmation to proceed, you surrender momentum to the opinions of those who are themselves uncertain. The absence of support is not evidence of impossibility. It is evidence that outcomes are not yet visible. The psychological threat is hesitation. You delay execution while waiting for reassurance that will only arrive after success is obvious. The cost of mercy toward your need for approval is stagnation. While you wait to feel ready, others act without permission. Acting like a strategist means converting isolation into focus. Without an audience, you are free to build without distortion. Sun Tzu wrote that the wise warrior avoids the battle, pointing to efficiency over validation. Progress made quietly compounds faster because it is unchallenged. Power affirmation: I do not require permission to proceed. Operating without support forces an internal recalibration. You learn to measure progress by output, not applause. This rewires confidence from something borrowed to something generated. Historical figures who altered systems rarely did so with encouragement at the beginning. Their early phases were marked by ridicule or indifference. That indifference filtered out distraction. When no one is watching, there is no pressure to perform identity. You are accountable only to results. This is why early solitude is not punishment, it is training. Those who cannot function without affirmation collapse under pressure because pressure removes applause. Those who master self-validation remain stable regardless of audience. Number 2 exposes the threat of misplaced loyalty to systems that do not invest back. When support is absent, many double down on environments that ignore them. They become more compliant, more available, more eager, hoping effort will eventually be recognized. This is a miscalculation of incentives. Systems do not reward sacrifice automatically, they reward leverage. Machiavelli warned that he who makes himself loved does not secure himself, because affection without advantage dissolves when conditions change. The psychological danger here is sunk cost attachment. You stay because you have already given time, energy, or identity. You confuse endurance with strategy. The cost of mercy is depletion. You exhaust resources trying to earn belonging instead of building independence. Robert Greene observed that never assume that those you trust will always be on your side, not as cynicism, but as structural awareness. Acting without support requires detaching from places that benefit from your effort while offering no alignment. Progress accelerates when energy is redirected from appeasement to construction. Power affirmation: I invest where returns are structural, not emotional. This law demands emotional sobriety. Walking away from unreciprocated loyalty feels like failure only if identity is tied to approval. In reality, it is a strategic correction. Successful individuals often appear detached, not because they lack feeling, but because they prioritize sustainability. When you stop trying to be chosen, you regain choice. Systems respond differently when you no longer seek validation. Some will adjust, others will reveal indifference. Both outcomes provide clarity. Clarity is power. Operating without support teaches you to build portable value rather than relying on institutional protection. Skills, assets, and reputation travel. Approval does not. As these laws take root, your posture shifts. You stop interpreting silence as rejection and start reading it as space. Space allows construction without interference. You begin to understand why those who succeed quietly unsettle others. They did not ask permission. They did not wait for consensus. They moved before approval was available. This is not recklessness. It is alignment with reality. Support follows proof. Proof never follows support. The absence of encouragement sharpens discernment. You become precise about where effort goes. You stop explaining yourself to those who cannot assist. You conserve language. You conserve energy. This conservation compounds. Acting without support trains decisiveness because hesitation has no audience to justify it. You either act or you stagnate. This binary produces clarity that comfort never does. What follows will be colder. The next laws will address the internal disciplines required to sustain momentum when fatigue replaces fear and when isolation becomes routine. Most fail not at the beginning, but after they have proven something and still feel unseen. That is where resentment grows. That is where many quit. Those who continue learn that invisibility is temporary, but self-reliance is permanent. Power is not granted at the moment of effort. It is acknowledged at the moment of outcome. Until then, you operate alone by design, not by accident. Success without support enters its most dangerous phase once momentum begins, but recognition still does not arrive. This is where many people break. Not because they lack ability, but because they misinterpret silence as futility instead of insulation. When effort compounds privately, pressure shifts inward. Fatigue replaces doubt. Discipline replaces hope. The next laws operate in the colder terrain where the absence of reinforcement tempts you to compromise structure for relief. If you misunderstand this phase, you will sabotage progress just before it becomes irreversible. Number 3 confronts the threat of premature visibility. When you operate without support, the instinct to announce progress becomes strong. You want proof that effort matters. You want acknowledgement that struggle is seen. This urge is psychologically natural but strategically dangerous. Visibility attracts opinion before it attracts protection. Machiavelli understood this when he warned that men judge outcomes, not processes. Revealing intent before results invites interference. People who could not help you build will suddenly feel entitled to influence direction. The psychological threat here is dilution. Once your plans are public, they no longer belong solely to you. They become subject to doubt, advice, resistance, and projection. Sun Tzu wrote that all warfare is based on deception, meaning advantage comes from controlling information, not sharing it freely. The cost of mercy is exposure. When you reveal too early, you trade insulation for validation. Acting strategically means allowing results to speak first. Silence preserves flexibility. Power affirmation: I let outcomes announce themselves. This law requires emotional restraint. Humans are social narrators. We want witnesses to effort. But progress does not need witnesses. it needs continuity. Many historical figures protected their work in obscurity not out of secrecy, but out of efficiency. When no one knows what you are building, no one can slow it down. Premature visibility attracts expectation before infrastructure exists to sustain it. By the time attention arrives naturally, you are already positioned, not negotiating. Number 4 exposes the threat of internal fragmentation. Operating without support forces you to play multiple roles simultaneously. Planner, executor, regulator, and evaluator all collapse into one identity. Without structure, this creates chaos. You begin reacting to your own fatigue instead of adhering to systems. Machiavelli emphasized the necessity of order when he wrote that a ruler must impose structure even when conditions are unstable. The psychological danger here is improvisation masquerading as flexibility. You abandon routines under the illusion of adaptability. In reality, consistency is what carries momentum through isolation. Robert Greene observed that what is offered freely is often valued less, and this applies internally. When you treat your own standards casually, discipline dissolves. The cost of mercy is burnout. Acting without support requires rigid personal systems that operate regardless of mood. Power affirmation: I obey the structure I create. This law separates those who endure from those who fluctuate. Motivation is unreliable. Systems are not. When no one is holding you accountable, structure becomes the substitute. Fixed schedules, non-negotiable outputs, and clear metrics replace encouragement. This is not rigidity, it is survival architecture. Those who succeed alone do so because their internal order compensates for external absence. Freedom without structure leads to drift. Structure without applause. As these laws integrate, your psychology changes. You stop seeking emotional confirmation and start relying on operational clarity. You no longer need to feel inspired to act. Action becomes procedural. This is where power quietly forms. Others confuse this with coldness. In reality, it is efficiency. You are no longer negotiating with uncertainty. You are executing through it. The next phase will be even more precise. It will address how isolation reshapes perception, how resentment can poison judgment, and how to remain internally aligned when progress feels invisible. Many fail here not because the path is wrong, but because solitude becomes misinterpreted as stagnation. Those who understand these laws recognize that silence is not absence, it is preparation. Isolation becomes most dangerous when it begins to feel permanent. At this stage, progress exists, systems are running, and effort is no longer chaotic, yet recognition still does not arrive. This is where resentment quietly forms. Not explosive anger, but a slow corrosion of judgment. The next laws are designed to neutralize that corrosion before it turns inward and destroys the very discipline that carried you this far. Number 5 confronts the threat of resentment toward the indifferent world. When you succeed with zero support, it is tempting to develop a private grievance against those who ignored you, doubted you, or benefited without contributing. This resentment feels justified, it feels earned. Psychologically, however, it is destabilizing. Resentment binds your attention to the past and hands emotional control back to people who are no longer present. Machiavelli understood the danger of emotional attachment to grievance when he warned that hatred is more dangerous than opposition because it clouds judgment. The psychological threat here is distortion. You begin interpreting neutral events as insults. You overcorrect decisions to prove a point that no one is making anymore. Robert Greene noted that resentment is a sign of weakness, not morally, but strategically, because it narrows perspective. The cost of mercy toward resentment is misalignment. You allow old neglect to dictate new behavior. Acting strategically means converting resentment into data, not fuel. You observe who aligned late, who never aligned, and you store that information without emotional charge. Power affirmation: I release resentment and retain clarity. This law demands emotional maturity beyond most people's reach. Anger feels energizing, but it is inefficient. It drains focus and hardens identity around injury. Those who succeed alone must remain internally clean. History shows that leaders who allowed bitterness to guide decisions eventually compromised their own structures. Emotional neutrality is not forgiveness. It is instant. When you are no longer trying to be understood by those who did not support you, you reclaim bandwidth for it. Number 6 exposes the threat of self-isolation turning into rigidity. Operating without support trains independence, but if unchecked, that independence can calcify into distrust. You begin assuming no one is capable, no one is reliable, no one is aligned. This mindset feels protective, but it limits scale. Machiavelli observed that even the strongest ruler requires selective alliances, noting that wisdom lies in choosing when to rely on others and when not to. The psychological danger here is overcorrection. You mistake autonomy for permanence and reject collaboration even when it becomes strategically advantageous. The cost of mercy is stagnation at a higher level. You plateau not from weakness, but from refusal to integrate. Sun Tzu wrote that the general who understands both strength and weakness will be victorious. Balance rather than extremes. Acting without support does not mean acting alone forever. It means choosing alignment from strength rather than need. Power affirmation: I choose alliances from position, not desperation. This law refines discernment. Early solitude was necessary because support was conditional and unreliable. Later solitude becomes optional. The danger is failing to update strategy as conditions change. Independence should produce leverage, not isolation. Those who succeed alone must eventually learn to delegate without surrendering control, to collaborate without dissolving authority. This requires standards, not walls. When you remain selectively open, you scale without dependency. By this stage, your internal posture has shifted permanently. You no longer seek approval. You no longer narrate struggle. You no longer resent neglect. You operate with quiet confidence built from repetition, not recognition. Others begin to sense this. They cannot pinpoint it, but they adjust their behavior. Influence emerges not from declaration, but from consistency. What remains is the one that determines whether success achieved without support becomes durable or collapses under its own internal weight. The last threat is subtle and internal. It is not doubt, it is comfort. And comfort has ended more trajectories than opposition ever did. Comfort is the most deceptive enemy of those who succeeded without help. It arrives quietly, without resistance, without warning. It feels earned, it feels reasonable, and that is why it ends more trajectories than failure ever could. The final law exists to prevent the most subtle collapse of all, the slow surrender of edge once survival is no longer urgent. Number 7 confronts the threat of comfort replacing discipline. When you rise without support, every gain feels personal. You remember the nights without reassurance, the days without validation, the stretch where no one checked on you or believed in the outcome. When stability finally appears, the nervous system exhales. That exhale is dangerous. Humans are wired to reduce effort once threat subsides. Machiavelli warned that fortune favors those who remain vigilant even in calm periods, because stability invites negligence. The psychological threat here is softness disguised as balance. You begin prioritizing ease over precision. You delay decisions that once demanded urgency. You tolerate inefficiencies because they no longer feel fatal. Robert Greene observed that what is secure tends to decay, not because success is wrong, but because maintenance requires the same intensity as creation. The cost of mercy is regression. When discipline relaxes, standards slip. When standards slip, others surpass quietly. Acting strategically means treating comfort as a signal to reinforce structure, not loosen it. Power affirmation: I do not confuse relief with completion. This law requires the highest level of self-governance. There is no external pressure to correct you anymore. No lack pushing you forward, no doubt forcing clarity. You must generate intensity without desperation. That is rare. History shows that those who rose from nothing often fell after achieving something, not because they were attacked, but because they assumed the climb was over. Comfort whispers that effort can now be optional. It is lying. The systems that carried you here require maintenance. The habits that protected your focus must remain intact. Those who stop sharpening dull slowly, then suddenly. True self-reliance is not about isolation. It is about internal consistency regardless of conditions. When comfort arrives, you must become stricter with yourself, not softer. Reduce noise, increase selectivity. Preserve the routines that feel unnecessary now, because they are the ones that will protect you later. Power is not lost dramatically. It leaks through small allowances made in moments of ease. This is the final separation point. Most people can endure hardship. Very few can endure comfort without losing hunger. The ones who do become permanent forces, they do not chase momentum, they maintain it. They do not wait for pressure to perform, they operate from standard. The world eventually notices, not because they announce success, but because they never retreat from discipline. Succeeding with zero support was never about proving others wrong. It was about proving yourself reliable to yourself. That reliability must survive every phase: struggle, momentum, recognition, and stability. When no one is watching and nothing is at risk, your behavior reveals whether power is temporary or structural. You are no longer prey waiting for assistance. You are no longer reacting to neglect. You are operating from internal command. Support may arrive later. It may not. It no longer matters. Your progress is no longer conditional, and that is the quiet advantage no one can take from you.